Good evening and welcome to Politico Live here from Politico World Headquarters in Roslyn, Virginia. I'm joined by my boss, Editor-in-Chief John Harris, Juana Summers, who will be up at 4 a.m. to write Morning Defense, has the Pentagon among their beat. We just heard from a president who said he prefers peaceful solutions, but that there is a plainly just cause here that requires action. John, you're a longtime watcher of presidential speeches. What was your top takeaway?
Just how nuanced the message from the president was. It was intellectually consistent as a whole, but different passages, almost sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, pointed in different directions. This is an outrage to humanity, but our response will be targeted and surgical. The United States doesn't do pinpricks. That's not how our military operates. But we won't be have boots on the ground. I felt that there was almost like a ping pong match going on inside Barack Obama's mind as he tried to make his case, and yet also gave, I think, viewers a very clear window into the argument and the debate that he's taking place within himself.
Now we're going to hear from just a second from Reid Epstein, who's at the White House. But Juana Summers, part of that ping pong match that John referred to was the president talking about what he's not going to do.
And some of the things he said he's not going to do is he won't put boots on the ground, as John said. He's not going to make this another Iraq and Afghanistan.
No prolonged air campaign.
Exactly,
yeah.
But it's important to note that he also said that he's ordered the military units that have been moved in the area, particularly units in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea, to stay the course, to stay there as they're working on a diplomatic solution. So there's still that kind of shot fired across the bow there to say, we're giving this a good faith effort. But if that doesn't work out, certainly military capability is at the ready.
Now, I'll admit, this one thing that surprised me about this speech was the president stuck to what he has been going to say, what he's been planning to say. All the diplomatic messiness the last couple of days, the president totally avoided this. This could be the speech that he gave 2 days ago, right, Scott?
Well, although at the end he did say he wants to give diplomacy a chance, give peace a chance, and give this kind of unlikely last-minute diplomatic
the peace he built was
gambit a chance. I would say the most dubious line in his speech was he said, well, diplomacy is taking place. I've asked Congress to defer. In fact, the diplomacy would be more effective, as he said elsewhere in his speech, with a robust, credible military threat behind it. And so, in fact, the reason he asked Congress to defer the vote is they would lose if the vote was held now. The diplomacy that's taking place would be more powerful if Congress passed this authorization. The president had in his hand a credible, essentially, gun that is cocked, and say, now let's see if we can avoid this gun going off.
Now, Juana Summers, amazingly, the Syria action support seems to have been falling, both on Capitol Hill and in the country, in polls and in the whip counts that people have been doing. This was designed to turn that around. Did you see in there something that was going to turn this immediately?
I've been talking to lawmakers on and off who have been expressing some skepticism about whether or not intervention in Syria is the right thing to do. And one of the things they've said is that America can't be the world police, as the president said tonight. That America needs to be focused on our national security interests. And I think that's part of the case you heard the president try to make tonight.
Other than really speaking to them, answering those objections that you were hearing too.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things you've heard. Some of the most recent polls released today and yesterday focused on this, where it said that 6 out of 10 Americans still do not support military intervention in Syria. One of their chief concerns is they don't, while they certainly agree that the civil war is atrocious, and specifically if you look at the tolls, they don't agree that this is in our national security interest. So I think that's the case the president needed to make tonight if he wanted to get the American people behind it. You can certainly see tones of that in portions of this speech.
And we heard him talking directly to Americans, reading from their letters, bringing up those tough objections.
We did indeed. And to me, though, the speech was, in most of its arguments, I thought, directed to a small audience, the congressional audience. Obviously, he knew the entire country was watching, but I felt, and many times he was talking directly to the members of Congress. Well, the country watched.
I think we have with us Reid Epstein, who covers the White House for Politico. He's been on this story hour by hour, paragraph by paragraph for days. Reid, as you chatted with aides at the White House today, what was your sense of their number one mission tonight?
Well, they were sort of flummoxed because as the day went on, the story changed over and over again. I was really struck from the speech tonight, his direct appeal to my friends on the left and my friends on the right. So often we hear the president sort of make one case publicly and another one privately, but he basically took the curtain away from the case that his aides have been making on Capitol Hill, saying to his friends on the right to think about Americans' national security interest in a beefed up military, and his friends on the left thinking about international compassion and the country's leader as sort of an interventionist peacemaker. It was really a long way away from the "we're not red states, we're not blue states" Barack Obama that broke into national consciousness in 2004.
Reid, on truth serum, what do White House aides want to happen? Do they want this diplomatic deal to take place? Are they? What are they hoping the next 48 hours looks like?
Well, they certainly would like a diplomatic deal to take place. No one believes that that the Russians and the Syrians have enough credibility to agree or carry out the sort of deal that was being talked about at the UN. Syria would be such a difficult place, given that there's a civil war going on, given that there's who knows how many areas where chemical weapons are located. So the idea that they would surrender them all and that there could be a credible check that they have is a little preposterous at this point. But they see this as sort of another step. They would, on truth serum, they would like Congress to approve a use of force authorization to give the president power and to not make him look quite so embarrassed by forcing this upon the Congress and then losing a vote.
Now, Juana Summers, over at the Pentagon, they're ready, right? The president said here that they're continuing to prepare for this. What's your sense of what the runway would be for the Pentagon? The president said tonight that the U.S. military doesn't do pinpricks, trying to walk back the idea that this is too small. What's your sense from the Pentagon of how big it would be?
So Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have said that the Pentagon is ready to respond if President Barack Obama does eminently order any sort of strike. Now, those options could be as limited as just using targeted cruise missiles to using stealth bombers or other long-range options that they've discussed. And you saw earlier this week the Pentagon to get the order from President Obama to go ahead and expand that range of targets instead of looking at just a very small number to looking at a bigger strike. So they do appear to be prepared, ready for this. They say that they could do it as soon as possible. So there does seem to be a high sense of confidence there.
And when you're talking to them off camera, off the record, is your sense that they think that this strike is probably never going to happen or will eventually happen?
It's very interesting if you watch the evolution at the Pentagon. You've seen early on some skepticism from General Martin Dempsey earlier when responding during his confirmation hearing about the list of targets, potential military intervention in Syria. But I do get a sense from some of my Pentagon sources that they do believe that something could happen. Of course, today's diplomatic talks have may perhaps change the time frame for that. Some of my sources have suggested to me that they believe if a military strike does happen, it won't be until later in the fall, so not something imminent.
Right. Mike, the question though, and I'd be curious your view on this, if the point is to send a powerful message, if it's going to be limited, and why would the president not just do it and announce it after the fact, right? That's got to be what with the troubles that they're having in Congress. That's got to be the question that Obama and his staff have been asking about the road not taken. Just drop the bombs and then explain.
Yeah, because especially for a strike of this size, it's well within the president's purview. And
ample precedent for doing that.
Yeah, and members of Congress actually expect it. And so now we have the problem that
and they would welcome it. I don't get the sense that these members of Congress are eager to be put on the record about what they think. Don't they feel like that's your job? Yeah. You're the commander-in-chief.
Right. And yeah, this is getting to be old news. Like the end of August is when this would have had a clear nexus to the attack. Now it's so far apart, and I was chatting with people today, said that this diplomacy could go on for weeks.
Yeah, this is certainly not going to be a quick fix. It could take weeks to actually certify that these weapons are being turned over, and that's the worry of some in Congress, is that this could take so long after you've seen messaging from the Secretary of State, from the President, talking about the imminence and the urgency of this threat. It falls on a little awkward turf there.
Reid Epstein, did you get the sense that people at the White House know that they're in a hole here, or are they calm and cool as always, or what's the vibe around there from the staff?
Well, they certainly try to exude sort of a calmness. It was really interesting to watch them today and even yesterday, as it was almost as the White House was reaching out to Congress and the Hill in a way that we haven't seen them do in the 4.5 years that the president's been in office. We saw them sort of be pushing out information on Twitter, in background statements to reporters, with more specifics about sort of what they've done in the outreach and how much they've tried so hard on this than we see on almost any other issue. We saw one of the junior press people at the White House tweeted today that the White House has been in touch with at least 93 senators in the last few days about the Syria situation. When I asked them who the 7 were who they hadn't contacted, they wouldn't give up that information. I think that would be the most interesting thing to know, to see who, with all of this presidential outreach, who still hasn't gotten a call on this from the White House. But it's clear it's something that they've gone all out on. And one thing to ask is, why haven't we seen this kind of outreach on other issues in the past, on gun control, on the budget, on immigration? Why did it take the Syria issue to bring the all-hands-on-deck flood the zone pose from the White House, when they've had all these other issues that have come up where they haven't done that and haven't gotten the result they wanted?
Yeah, Reid, you're hearing a lot that people are saying that the president now is reaping the consequences of what we talked about for years: the failure to reach out to allies, to have personal relationships there, the lack of personal relationships on the Hill. John Harris, if you put on your presidential historian's hat, how does the president wind up winning this? How does the president wind up looking strong, or is the president at this point just trying to avoid losing?
I think that victory at this point seems to me would be a muddle through option, and we'll have the attention move on to something else. I don't see any scenario where this looks like a chapter in a book about resolute presidential leadership.
And Reid Epstein, jump in.
It's a bad chapter for the White House. It's hard to see how they move on to how they pivot to the economy with the debt ceiling and a CR coming up later this month. What credibility have they built out of this that they can turn into the next thing?
Okay, Reid Epstein, hang on for just a second. We're about to bring in my brother, Jonathan Allen. But first, John Harris, I'm going to do something that you often do to your editors and your reporters on these websites, and that is, what is our headline tomorrow going to be?
I think mixed messages from the president.
Thank you very much, John Harris. And now we're going to swap in Jonathan Allen. Juana Summers, what's going to be the lead of Morning Defense tomorrow?
What I'm going to be focused on is what this means for the Pentagon. You've seen House GOP lawmakers, from House Armed Services Committee Chairman Bill McKee and lots of Republicans making the argument tying Syria to sequestration. With this new twist, with looking at a diplomatic solution perhaps rather than an imminent strike, what does that mean for their argument? Do they have any hope to get these across the board cuts? So that's something that certainly the Pentagon community and defense lobbyists will be looking at in the days ahead.
Jonathan Allen, you're Politico's whip. In addition to being a White House reporter, you know the Hill. Every day you come by and tell me what you think is going on in the Hill. You told me that this was losing altitude in the Senate long before that became publicly apparent. What do you think the effect tonight was?
I think, interestingly, before, every time the administration talked to members of Congress, they lost more people than they gained for a while. I actually think the effect of today has been very positive for the administration. Members of Congress, just like the president, were looking for an out here. He had brought them, as the New York Times put it, into a box of his own making. They didn't want to have this vote. He's now given them at least a temporary rescue. And you're starting to see a little bit of a coalition gathering for sort of a conditional use of force authorization. If Assad doesn't give up his chemical weapons, then the president could use force. It's not there yet, but I hear a lot more positivity about that from both Republicans and Democrats than I did about this original force authorization.
And Reid Epstein, we're going to let you go after this, but does that idea of a third way resonate with you up there? Is there, do you think that's probably the either secret or public hope of the White House?
Well, I think if the White House can get something passed that has the word Syria in it, that they'll take that as a win. And so if this legislation that John is talking about, that Senators John McCain and Chuck Schumer were shepherding through the Senate starting, if that can pass and there's a conditional use of force that includes language about a military strike on Syria, the White House would take that as a win, and the president might use that to justify using force against Syria, even if all of the conditions aren't necessarily met.
And Reid Epstein, last question for you. What are White House reporters going to be pursuing tomorrow? What will people be asking Jay Carney on camera? What stories will people be scrambling for behind the scenes?
Well, I think the question for Jay Carney on camera is sort of what else is the White House going to do, and what can the president do that he hasn't done already? He gave a very similar speech tonight that he gave the Saturday of Labor Day weekend, very similar to the TV interviews he gave. And that, as John said, hasn't moved public opinion. It hasn't moved votes in Congress. How does his message change, and what is he going to do to persuade the members of Congress to pass something to let him save face on this?
Well, Reid, your coverage has been fantastic. Weekends, nights, you do it all. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on Politico Live on a busy night. Juana?
John, I just wanted to ask you, what do you
Thank
think,
you, Mike.
if you could sum up Obama's message to congressional Republicans, what was that message and how impactful do you think it was?
I think the message to congressional Republicans is that he is not taking force off the table. I think that's something that is well received. For a lot of them who don't want a war, they still believe that the president should have that ability. I think he's pushing them to continue some sort of use of force authorization. I think that is generally more well received than what he's brought there so far. So I think that's the main message. Interestingly, I'll give you another message tonight, I think, from the White House, if you don't mind. It seemed like he was talking to Bashar Assad tonight more than anyone else. This was a speech heavily weighted toward why he was going to war, rather than the likelihood that there might be some sort of diplomatic solution. The audience for that, of course, is Assad. And
Jonathan Allen, last question for you. If you were going to Vegas, you think that there will be a vote in the Senate, there will be a vote in the House, and what will happen?
I think at some point we'll have a vote in the Senate on some sort of use of force conditioned on what Syria does with its chemical weapons.
And that's days away or weeks away? Or?
I would say probably weeks, not many weeks. Perhaps as early as days. If the Senate does something like that, if they do it overwhelmingly, I think you could see the House possibly follow suit. Have not tested that theory yet with Speaker Boehner, and of course I wouldn't want to speak for his whip count. Oftentimes it's difficult for the House leaders in both parties to count their own members.
And as we say goodbye here, Juana Summers, what is the Pentagon press corps going to be pursuing tomorrow?
They want to know what military preparations are going to look like and what does maintaining presence look like. So far, the Pentagon itself has been very quiet. All the information about the posture in the area near to Syria has been just on leaked reports. So I think that tomorrow and the days ahead, if there is a gaggle, they'll be trying to pin down on that.
All right, thank you very much for joining us here on Politico Live. We're going to continue our coverage on Politico.com. We all are on Twitter various times. You're J.M. Summers, right? You're
John Allen, D.C.
I'm Mike Allen. Tonight we heard a president who was talking to a bunch of audiences. Jonathan Allen just pointed out to Assad himself, to most specifically to voters at home, telling them why that this should matter, that they should convince their representatives, talking also to Congress, making the case for action at the same time that he is pursuing diplomacy. As our boss John Harris said, some mixed messages. I'm Mike Allen here at Politico World Headquarters. Thank our Politico colleagues, and we'll see you on Politico.com.